Welcome to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm your host, Jeane Slone. I have written 2 historical fictions, She Built Ships During World War II and She Flew Bombers. Today in the studio, I would like to welcome Tosca Lenci, who is a prolific writer, and we really just have a small part of all her writings. As you can see here, we have the history of the daughters, daughter of Logos, and Delilah. Welcome, Tosca.
Thank you, Jeannie, and this is such a marvelous opportunity for independent writers. It's a great privilege to be here. Thank you.
And it's great for our audience. We can learn all about you and your books.
And that's very important to me. Not so much about me, but about the books. As you realize, it's what you wrote that brings all that wonderful information out of the women.
And you have written in so many genres. I was so surprised to look at your website. You've written short stories and essays and plays, and you've written for children. I was curious, do you have a background in English?
No, actually, my background would be Yerba Buena Grammar School and Marina Junior High School and Galileo High School in San Francisco, being the daughter of immigrants in a largely culturally ethnic neighborhood, growing up that way. Although my parents did move to Marin County after World War II, and I did my last year and a half of high school in a totally different milieu, and it offered a lot of opportunities I wouldn't have otherwise had for the fact that I'd always had this impulse to read and write.
Now, most of your books are would you say, the religious category?
No. Actually, my mother thought that too. This, which I'm calling the trilogy, has to do with the history of Old Canaan land, which has gone through different terms and now is part Palestine, part Israel, but a big swath of that territory and the peoples. There are 2 schools of thought about the Old Testament. This history of the daughters is a factual extraction of just the people information out of the scripture, out of the Old Testament, starting with the people about whom details are given, which in this case is 1935 BC with Abraham and Sarah, familiar names, and their beginning of their journey. But it takes it through, it follows the women, which it's unique in that it has all the patriarchal information in it, but it has also as much of the matriarchal that I was able to take out. And it's neutrally given, it's for the maximalist school of ancient scriptural study, which feels that there is actual history of peoples in the Testaments, as opposed to a minimalist school that feels that there isn't really a lot of actual history. So that's what the history is the foundation of the trilogy.
Do you have a theological background?
No, I was raised in a Christian faith. However, I was loosely raised. I was sent to catechism, and I was taught by the people who taught those classes, but my parents were non-denominational in their practice, and our home was more geared to a civility that would be expected, that you find in God's laws, but they were to be expected just from the human standpoint, I guess, is the best way to say it. Anyway,
well, you are an amazing researcher. You must love doing research.
I think that I was trained for that. I had, in high school, I took business, which was something that in our family, there were 4 sisters. It was expected as you got trained. A high school diploma for my mother was tantamount to a PhD, you know. But it let you find honest labor until you got married and had a family, you know, the typical cultural female thing. Yeah.
Well, I just was amazed to read your website about your publishing company and all the books that you've written, and I was curious about your background. I also wanted to know, your illustrations are very fascinating, and I wanted to know who has done most of the illustrations for your books.
Well, those are mine too.
So you have an artist talent then also.
I had a love for being occupied in art, but I tried different media, and I did some oil and some canvas, but I was able to go to Europe with my older daughter a couple of years ago, and I spent a better part of a day at the Uffizi Gallery, and I saw what a real art is just like, it's a lifetime learning thing. The brushes, the consistency of paints, you know, for the work that they did. When you see some of those beautiful, beautiful paintings, so smooth and so realistic, I have no idea how someone does that.
I had no idea that you were the artist. Very, very original, and
it was a pastime. It also helped.
It enhances your books.
It helped the learning process too. But this did take some 20 years of research, and I did have help. One woman who did the index for me. If you can imagine being at the computer and marking every single word on a page that should be in an index, and there can be like 100 on a page because the testaments are so intense, so dense. And a woman did that for me, you know, did the index, which was a miracle. I don't think I ever could have done that.
Yeah, indexes are daunting. I've done indexes, and they are very particular.
Time consuming.
Yeah, and you have to always have a third eye looking over your shoulder on them too.
I know. It's being a writer. You know, the way I thought of it as a girl, I think probably like I would be like Emily Dickinson, and I'd have this doting rich father, and I wouldn't have to do any housework, and my writings would be praised, and I would be encouraged, and I would be given time to do it, and I'd have beautiful gardens all around, you know. Not quite.
Yeah.
Not quite.
What?
If you're driven to write, you know what that is.
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to ask you, is what was the reason that has driven you to write so much?
Mind, and if I had started out as a girl, when I had, in my senior year, I was editor of the paper, and then I managed to get a year and a half of college, all towards a degree in creative arts and writing and literature, but at that point got married and became a mother within a year, and my husband was a graduate student for the next 6 years, and I became a working wife and mother, and you know, came from that culture. So I just imbued myself in that. If I had stayed single and written, but if I'd done that, I would not have written what I've written, because what I did wind up writing was from a whole quarter century of living, not writing, but living, and you know, all these wonders and thoughts and things, and if you're driven to write, you want to write them out, right? So I was able finally to start doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear from your first book. We'd love to hear a few paragraphs from History of the Daughters.
it looks like a textbook, but it isn't. But it has all these little stories in there of women that you've never heard of. But but there are stories of women you have heard of that can give a totally different interpretation than what you see done in movies, for example, or so-called documentaries. I will just talk about Mary the Magdalene now. That name's pretty familiar to people in Christianity, and most people, well, it has been known scholarly for a long time that there's nothing in the New Testament of record to support this very bad reputation that she bore for some 2,000 years. There is absolutely nothing in the New Testament to support that. And there is a section here in the history that gives the reasons why that conflation occurred, probably between other stories like an anointing that took place in Nain, that an unnamed woman known to be a sinner in the city approached Jesus. Then there's the other scene that some people think is spurious, but of a prostitute being thrown in front of him in town. But none of these women are named. And the way it probably happened is that at the end of Luke 7 is the story about the woman who was a sinner in the city with no one named. And at the very beginning of 8 is the first mention of Mary the Magdalene traveling with the mothers and the women who were supporting Jesus and his band out of their personal resources, which the good book actually says. So more evidence, together with some that has arisen from apocryphal papyri that have been found in more recent years that indicate her as an independent woman, there is most likely the case that she was a middle-aged woman, a widowed or independent with resources. There is also this apocryphal evidence that she was the closest to the mother of Jesus, or the man we've come to call Jesus. So that's one little segment in here. You can find stories of Abigail and Ahinoam and
history of all the daughters.
The daughters.
What a daunting task.
Well, you know, the Bibles have come to us, all of them, essentially until our era, via the mind and the mouths and the hands of males. And we now have women who, the last decade or two, have begun to enter the field of theological study. And there's a lot to be added to what we think is knowledge about the epoch and all its eras. So that's this.
Tell me, Tosca, do you consider yourself a feminist?
No, as a matter of fact, I like the term, I'm feministic, but I'm not a feminist, not at all. I have great respect for men and all that they've done, but then you get into the male-female gender issue, and that's another whole subject for me, but that's part of yet another book that is still on the shelf.
About how long did it take for you to write this?
Well, I started the research in 1983 or 4, and I had the first draft of it done in the 90s, thinking, oh, I thought I'd finished it. It turned out to be really just a skeleton. Wow. So the first edition went up online in 2006. I started the company. It's just a one-woman company with, I have a license, but it's never made any profit or anything, right? Nor have I yet. It's interesting because I kept a ledger of what I'd eked out, along for Xeroxing, equipment, whatever. So you could say I spent about $1,000 a year, so I have about over $30,000 just money investment in writings, you don't realize. Yeah.
Till it's tax time.
I know. So this,
Well, let's talk about, this is your second book, Daughter of Logos?
Yes, well, I managed to get 1,000 copies of it printed. I wanted to see this. This was before the ebook explosion. This was free online. This didn't get free online. Once I had all the research done, then I wrote this fictionalization, which is of just the 4 years of Yehoshua, Yeshu, Yeshu, how do they say it? Yeshus in Greek, Jesus, anyway, all of those words, names. It's the 4 years of his life as facts, according to facts that come out of the New Testament, told against the politics and the history of his time. It's not a religious book. It treats him as a man, because I really think he's not. And that was a big argument back in 325 AD when Emperor Constantine held a big assembly calling Christians, quote unquote, from all of his then empire to kind of hammer out. I mean, it was a control thing. It was like, balancing out all these different, and that's when the canon was essentially, which is essentially to this day unchanged, was accepted. Certain books not. And at that time there was a man named Arius who was an archbishop in Egypt, and there were all these fine philosophical things that people had to agree on. What did Jesus really represent? Was he God incarnate? Had he always been God? Or was he man? And Arius was coming from the side that he was man, and what he did was most, there was God in him, of course, but what he did as a man was pretty phenomenal.
Well, let's hear a part
you want to
from
hear
Daughter of Logos.
But I should say...
and I did want to ask you, are you bilingual? Did you translate a lot of your books into Spanish?
No, I didn't do the translation. I have that play that I had done in Spanish.
I see.
But no, I hired someone to do that. It went through 3 or 4 different translators.
That's great.
Yeah. I should mention, too, that this was called Beloved Disciple, Daughter of Logos when I printed it. But on the internet, the free download, where everything's free, it's called now Jesus' Beloved Disciple. And it looks at those years through the eyes of the high priest, not Caiaphas, who Rome put in, but the high priest that they moved out, Hananiah, however it's pronounced, and Mary the Magdalene. It's told pretty much through their eyes. And this is part of the feminine part. She may have worked bare land with bare hands, brought vegetables out of the brick of it, carried water, and while her fingernails dug parched earth away from stems so they could suck up every drop, worried about the pots left over the cooking fire, yet steeling herself, not leaving off the counterweight of the trickling water jug, the family coming in for noonday meal. But the seedling's thirst had to be satisfied first, or there might not be any meals next year. She was had not in slavery, deep thankfulness. That small patch of land was part hers, too, until God's predetermined day she would not have a body that needed land for sustenance. She did not need fear a day's donkey ride and dismissal at some wayside, to fend for herself among distant kinsmen, if lucky, or glean fields until she fell flat for the last time. Oh yes, Abraham's brother Nahor once may have sung his song to their niece Milcah, brother Haran's daughter, but could Reumah, his concubine, have believed hers and Nahor's Maacah ever less bloodworthy than Bethuel? No more than David had lesser love for Absalom. Magda's mind was daydreaming again along the byways of womanhood. Ironic how veiled was the oh-so necessary mother blood, the true confirmer of legitimacy, a repeating cycle. Through the kings had gone sovereignty, through the queens the priesthood. Should such queens, though, be envied? Hamital, or Nehushta, 900 years after Jochebed, one grown son after another murdered before she surrendered to Nebuchadnezzar, who carried away her and her smallest to Babylon's court, the ultimate tender to new gold temples of man. Too many the women from whom such sacrifice had been extracted at each new beginning.
Excellent, thank you. I was really curious as to whether you have tried to find an agent or a publisher.
I did make some forays, spent considerable time in between projects, sending queries out. This was
I have done the same.
having to do all that research through that particular agent's site, figuring out whether they'd be interested, going and looking up their books to see if they fall into your genre.
Yeah.
You know, either you're going to be a writer or you're going to be an agent or a publisher or a printer or whatever.
But you did end up forming your own publishing company.
I did, to put this out because I wanted to see. I had no idea that would even come about. I was, you know, this was not yet totally edited and online. This was 2000. This was 2006.
This is a beautiful hardcover.
I had 7 made. They were $50 a piece for copyright in the Library of Congress and an office copy, and yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, a guy down in Berkeley. I've been so lucky. The people I've found, and like this was done at the copy store in Sonoma. They had a lovely girl there who did the cover for me. I mean, there are so many talented people out there. And then the woman that's the web mistress for the LP site, you know, like she just recently uploaded another couple of addenda to things. And, you know, I don't know a thing about managing a website.
Yeah, a lot of us need help with that. I mean, you know, just being an author is daunting enough. Everything else, and all, you know, the problem is, I'm sure you feel this way, it takes you away from your writing.
God.
Yeah.
To write, you know,
when somebody says to me, "Do you Twitter?" I go, "No, I just."
No. I barely email, you know. And if it weren't for my kids, it's second nature, you know. Everything's instantaneous. I mean, I started out on a Royal Portable, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do have a lot of free books on your website. I was pretty amazed by that.
I have finished. I determined. Well, my husband passed away. It'll be 6 years. 6 years now, and after that, I just eventually determined that, well, and I've been through caregiving, caretaking, the last 12 years. My in-laws, my mother, who died just a couple of weeks shy of her 100th birthday, a remarkable woman, but I've had such a, and then my sister-in-law, I was her only family of this generation, and she had to go into a nursing home too.
That's a lot of people. Not everybody ends up with that much.
And she died last September, so I have had so much experience going through possessions of people, all of the things that they cherished, that they saved, things that they thought they could fix that were usable, things that they wanted to pass on to their descendants. Amazing. I just, you know, I've had a whole lesson of that, and I began to use my time, get rid of surplus stuff, and I decided I would try to get my works for posterity, as it says on the website.
Yes.
You know, they're there.
Yeah.
They're finished as best I can do them. That's it, you know. That's it.
Well, let's talk about your third book,
Delilah.
Delilah.
Okay, so
I always loved that name.
this gives the history from 1925 BC to when Rome totally took over. And this has a segment 4 years of that period. Now, Delilah is current, and it's got some espionage, and it's got romance, and it's even got a little bit of sex in it, I will have to say. It's kind of a Casablanca-type story, but Delilah Sorek is made. She has a good friend who becomes head of a new State Department, fictional, Division of Global Socialization. And this good friend of hers, Maxwell, who's always had a crush on her, he recruits her to be an agent. And she has one assignment in a jungle village that you find out about, where the bishop is killed. You find out about in retrospect. But then this assignment is she's to go to the Middle East, and she's to bring back grassroots data from the people as to how they see their history as it is affecting present day. And in the process, she goes to famous sites, but she travels with an Assyrian Palestinian, a Egyptian Palestinian, and an Israeli Palestinian. But before she leaves, the intelligence division has Maxwell tell her that they want her to keep her eye out for 3 men believed up to no good, a cell that wants to cause a ruckus in Jerusalem. So anyway, it goes on from there. And again, you know, just like in these books, there are stories of things that happen. I'm just reading to you a lot of, well, this is not exactly stream of consciousness of Delilah. This is when she hooks up with this agent. He does, this other guy, supposedly a bad guy. She doesn't know. She hooks up with him, and she says she's with some consortium, and she wants to meet a bomb maker. So this is part 8. The man didn't speak until they were seated opposite the table, and what he said caught her off guard. Would you want a child of yours sent to give his or her life in a war to satisfy cloaked private interests instead of looking to his or her own family and its future? His look was steady but not offensive. It's a different thing if Barbary is at the gate. Delilah needed time. Feel out what the persona she meant to convey would say. She took a tangent. I think even bigger a fantasy than God is that major world powers ever will know enough history to rein themselves in time. He drew thumb and forefinger from cheeks to lips several times. You favor isolationism? Empires, irrespective type, I think, are becoming things of world past, Delilah said. He tilted his head back and lifted his eyelids. My son was killed in ill-conceived crossfire. He lowered his head and with index fingernail traced a rut in the table's soft wood. Yitzhak, he whispered, then gave his head a sharp twist. But it is not pity for myself, I feel, for my grandchildren, who have known not one day in all their lives so far without seeing fear in their mother's eyes. And not only when they leave the house, he slapped the table. No one is safe, not on any side. Delilah recalled that something had happened there, what now seemed to her a long while ago. He was a handsome man once, she thought, as the anguished look receded, but not totally, never would it, from his face. He relaxed back in his chair and held Delilah's eyes the first time. I used to believe in human nature, but I've seen enough, he scoffed, of drummings up from ancient scripture and of, quote, democratic litany. Delilah heard the quotation marks. Don't matter whose, to justify atrocities. She waited. The line's been blurred in me, you see. He turned away and stared impassively into space. Politically, all is nothing but a stringing of inconclusive words around material and psychological chaos. What I do is of little consequence. Everyone's to blame for missing the mark. Missing the mark? The actual words used by Jesus, not as later translated, sin. Delilah felt herself siding with Peter again. What good had pacifism accomplished ever?
That's a great ending. Well, Tosca, if you could tell us about your publishing company and your website, where people can go to download some of your books.
The website is called lppublications.com.
Okay.
And everything there is available for download. And that's about it.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Yes, and I have thoroughly enjoyed having you on WriterSpeak, Tosca.
What an opportunity for me. What a wonderful, and it's coming at just the right time.
Oh, good.
You know, there's been no one to really talk about my work.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It's good to talk with other authors.
It definitely
good.
is. Thank you so much.
And thank you for sharing with the audience. WriterSpeak is produced at the Community Media Center of the North Bay. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for a chat with another talented writer.